Is there a sign outside?
The sign is out, yeah.
It's on the other door.
On the application of Ruth and Earl Sukfort. I'm sorry. With respect to demolishing the building located at 48 Outlook Drive, any party, whether entitled to notice thereof or not, may appear in person or be represented by an agent or attorney at the hearing. Are the applicants here? Yes. Please come to the table.
Actually, my name is... Could I approach it?
Absolutely. Have a seat.
Introduce myself to the commission. My name's Matthew Seppi from EMS Development.
Okay.
And I'm here with Paula and Harry Sukforth, who are the owners of 48 Outlook Drive.
Okay.
And
what we will do is we will give you we would like you to state your case, why you're here, what the issues are with your house, what you know about it, what you believe is the reason for the demolition permit. We will then ask for questions and comments from the commission members. We will then ask questions and comments from the audience, and then we will take over.
Okay.
So, do we do the public then us?
Yes.
Okay. We'll do the public comments, and then we'll get commission comments, and then we will vote.
Okay, great. Again, my name's Matthew Seppi from EMS Development, and I am a builder in the town of Lexington, and currently working again with Paula and Harry to purchase their property at 48 Outlook Drive. We currently have an offer in place that we've accepted. I am working with John Farrington, an attorney in town, who's helped us to guide our way through the process of the demolition bylaw. And I put together some information that hopefully each member of the commission has. I'd like to walk through that to try to go through and highlight some of the points of the property and give you some insight on what the current situation is. Some general history on the property is it's been owned by Harry's family, the Sukforth, since the 1940s. Harry's grown up there and lived in the property, and his family's owned it the entire time. He's currently the executive of the estate, looking to sell the property, and the house has currently been vacant probably for almost 7 years now, and it's something where there's been little or no maintenance that's been performed there during that time period. The current house is about 1,568 square feet, bungalow-style home with vinyl siding, and it has a small 1.5-story addition on the back of the house that makes up approximately 144 square feet of the overall living area.
Could you just ask, has the house been heated during the 7 years or unheated?
It's been heated, yes. What we did as part of the process of reviewing the house is I reviewed it myself, because I'm a builder in town, and I had an independent structural engineer, architect, come and take a look at the house as well, so we could review it collectively and then identify what the current conditions were that we need to address if we wanted to try to preserve the house. If you look under the handout that I gave, and we started at number 2, if we work our way through, I tried to highlight some of the structural items that were found. The first one was the existing concrete block and foundation has several cracks and instances of crumbling mortar that would require repair. The second item is the 1.5-story addition that's been built on the back of the house. It currently contains a bathroom and a laundry area, and it has no footing and foundation. It is built on 3 piers, similar to what a deck would be built on. If you look at the second photo in the package, this would show you what the corner of where the deck that is collapsed in the back of the addition currently are. So this is the addition that's been built. You can see no footing and foundation walls. This is where the back deck was that's currently collapsed. Upon review of the records at the building department, there's been no final sign-offs on the addition that was constructed. So it is showing signs of pitching away from the house, and we obviously believe it's due to improper structural integrity of how the addition's been constructed. In that area, again, it holds what is the second bathroom and the laundry area and so forth for the house. As I mentioned, the back deck is completely collapsed. That was built as part of the addition, and again, that's just I mean, there was lally columns that didn't have any footings or anything, so that's collapsed. Upon review of the basement girders and the first floor joist, they're showing signs of rot and further settling, and as indicated in the second page of the handout, based off the structural review, it is showing deflection that is greater than what is, allowed by code and what would be expected. The first and second floor interior load-bearing walls have clearly settled due to the issues with what's going on with the girders and the floor joists in the basement area. Also upon review, we identify that the roof rafters are much greater than what's allowable by code, and they are showing significant bowing and deflection. If you look within the package, it would be the third photo in. You can see there's at least a 1 foot of deflection from the exterior as the roof line is sunken into the middle of the roof.
Sorry, how much deflection did you?
There's approximately about 1 foot deflection from the exterior rafter that lungs on the exterior wall as it comes into the middle of the house. It's approximately about a foot that it's sunken in.
It's bowed or it's deflected? He's got that board across as a reference point.
Oh.
It's touching this, but it's not touching these, so this
Correct.
one's sagged.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
I think is what,
Is that what
That
you're
is
trying to
correct,
show?
yes.
this one's sagged.
Yes. There's portions of the second floor ceiling that have collapsed due to water damage. That is shown in the next page over. As you can see, the ceiling tiles in the back corner have collapsed.
So the plaster ceiling is intact, but it's the tiles that were added that was fallen.
Part of the plaster in that particular area is coming down as well. It's hard to make out the slat boards that are in the photo, but it's both lost the plaster and the tiles in that particular area. Also, there's been quite a bit of non-code compliant electrical work that's been done in the house. Just for a reference, the next photo I just included is multiple receptacles that have no wires in there. So it's going to be a pretty significant task, I think, to trace down what's gone on with the electrical and ensure that it's safely and properly working. Now, these structural items obviously are definitely significant from a cost perspective to repair, and these are in addition to the fact that the house is very old and contains all its own original equipment, and the whole bathrooms and kitchens would have to be gutted, the whole exterior would have to be stripped down. I mean, from a cosmetic standpoint, I obviously would just like to make sure that's noted and on the record, but I think, cosmetically, that's what you'd expect when you have a house of that age. You'd have to go in and gut the kitchens and gut the baths and do those type of things. But in order to get the house to a point where it would be marketable, the structural issues would have to be dealt with along with all the other aesthetic and layout related items. Especially with the particular problems that exist with the addition that houses the bathroom, because if that had to be removed from the house would basically be down to one bathroom, which is up on the second floor. There's 3 bedrooms that are currently up on the second floor, 2 of them being extremely small by today's standards. So the layout's in a challenging interior. So in order to get it marketable, we felt that it was going to be a situation where those 2 bedrooms would have to be combined. And if the addition was removed, we'd primarily end up with a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, which is not very marketable by today's standards. So after getting an opportunity to review this, information.
If you could leave the door unlocked, please. Leave the door locked. Yeah, just fine.
See the legal just going to say something. No, but Teresa Comcast, see how many were on. 24. I know we're over. The question is how significant. you
Are
want.
all these people for 48 hours?
Are all of you, are there people here that aren't for 48 Outlook?
Yes.
What was the question?
Are there people here who are not here for 48 Outlook?
If you're not here for 48 Outlook, could you please just step outside? We've exceeded the maximum allowed people in a room. As soon as we're done with 48 Outlook, we will call everybody else back in.
There's one outside. There's too many people in the room, so it's our turn.
As soon as the hearing's over, I will let you all know.
Thank you.
But you hear you.
Oh, they can hear my mouth.
Thank you, I'm sorry. The more people came in, the more nervous I got about it.
Nope, no problem. So, in review of all these issues, along with all the cosmetic, Paula and Harry are actually considering living in the house themselves. They're lifelong Lexington residents and considered moving back into the town, moving back into the house. But upon review of all the costs associated with fixing the structural work and all the aesthetic work, they felt that it was a better situation if we made a proposal to request a demolition of the house, and I would purchase it and just go ahead and move forward with, trying to construct a new house there.
Excuse me, it was just really noisy. I couldn't hear what he was saying. Could you just repeat the last paragraph?
I'm having trouble hearing too.
Sure. In light of all the information I talked about, both the structural and aesthetic side of it, Harry and Paula had considered moving back into the house themselves because they're lifelong residents, and upon review of the cost associated to fix the structural work and to fix all the items that I had mentioned aesthetically for new kitchens and new baths and so forth, they felt that it was just not something that they could do from a cost perspective, that it was just too cost prohibitive to go ahead and do that. The next item, just to touch on quickly, would be in working with John Farrington, we've got a chance to review through all the items of the cultural survey. Couldn't find any specific information on this house. Mostly the survey speaks directly to the area known as Fair Oaks and specifically references two houses that 75 Outlook and 341 Merritt. Those are the two houses that are specifically mentioned. John and I weren't able to find anything distinguishing this particular house to be historically significant or architecturally significant. Also, in review of the information, I'm sure as the Commission's aware, the Fair Oaks plan as originally laid out was laid out for much larger lots and house styles than how that area was currently developed. The area currently was developed primarily with 50-foot wide, 210-foot deep lots, which is, very different than what was originally determined within the Fair Oaks plans that were laid out. And also, the last item I have is that the neighborhood's a very nice neighborhood consisting of a lot of different homes, but not a lot of, due to the character of the neighborhood, there are a lot of the houses that are of different size, shape, and so forth. There's also 3 new houses that have, one that just got built, one that was built a few years ago, and one currently being built in the neighborhood as well. I do feel, though, I build in town, and I am very aware of trying to work within the confines of the neighborhood. So if anything, if we were fortunate enough allowed to be able to construct a new house there, I would definitely be conscious of working with folks in the neighborhood and making sure that we try to conform with what's expected there. And I do think that the lot sizes there also, only being 50 and 60 feet wide, somewhat do restrict what you could do there. So any new house that we propose to construct there, we feel it could conform with the neighborhood well.
I will have to speak very loudly. Are there people in the audience that would like to ask questions or make statements about what we have just heard?
Well, I have one question. You mentioned the house has been vacant for 7 years.
I'm sorry, sir, have you...
The house has been vacant for 7 years. I'm Hamid Karmani. Was there any attempt to do any of these repairs? As we all know, about 2 or 3 years ago, we had ice dams, that most of the houses were damaged. I'm sure there are people in this room that have experienced that. If something like that's the picture you're showing, which I couldn't see closely, if that happens, you would try repair it right away. In the last 7 years, I've never seen anybody going in there As a matter of fact, I don't even know Mr. Stewart over here. Now, if they desire to come back to become my neighbor, I haven't even seen him in the 7 years. I never met him. So, that's all.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? Yes, sir.
George
Name?
Foote, sorry. Was there any attempt, was there anything to prevent the maintenance being done in 7 years?
I couldn't speak to that as well as I think Paul and Harry could. Again, I think, you know, the maintenance is a component of it, but I think even daily, weekly maintenance probably was not going to do anything to help with the structural issues that just occur from a house that's been so old, and especially with the addition not being constructed properly.
Okay. Now,
A new burner in.
new burner, so you could keep the house, the
Yeah.
heat going?
Yeah.
All right. I was interested in your comments about whether the addition was done properly, right? Was that done by like a professional contractor, if you know, or was it done like just by the homeowner, or what? I don't know.
No, it was done by a contractor.
All right. And
I don't know how professional they were.
well,
Again, I just referenced what was available
Sure.
at the building department, and I know there were no sign-offs that were done on any of the final sign-offs.
there were. Oh, there was none.
There was not. I have that here.
There was a building permit though.
There was,
Okay.
but yeah, none of the final electrical, plumbing, framing, or any of that were signed off on.
Is there any, do we know when these defects were first discovered? I don't know.
Yeah.
Were any of them, do we know when those problems were first noticed?
I mean, the deck that's collapsed in the back and this rotting, you know, I'm not sure how long that's been going on for, but based on my experience, it looks like it's been a condition that's existed for quite a while.
Right, right. So, you're saying that,
You can't deny them access to the room. You have a 48.
48 outlook?
We're only
48
discussing
outlook?
48 outlook right now. All others have been asked to wait outside.
Could you stand somewhere else away from the door, sir? Because we have to let them in. It's against the law for you to keep closing the door on them.
yeah, so, just that they
Thank
open
you.
the door. So I'm interested about your comments about if the addition was, it's really the biggest problem is the addition, I mean, structurally, is that what you're saying?
I would say it's definitely one of the bigger problems, but the settling and rotting of the main girder in the basement that I mentioned as well, obviously that would be something that's causing the first floor to sag and would have to be repaired as well as, I mean, the addition, again, there's no economical or feasible way to really get a foot in the foundation in that. I mean, it really would have to be removed from the house and be reconstructed.
Hypothetically, if the house were moved, wouldn't they have to replace the main girder anyway?
If the house was moved,
Yeah.
as far as moved,
Oh,
meaning,
moved.
meaning sold.
Moved and moved to a different location. I mean hypothetically. I mean, because that's one of the options that the commission would consider, as I understand it. What would wouldn't that involve perhaps a replacement of like something like that, a main girder?
If not, I mean, if a house was removed from its current foundation
Sure.
and brought to a different site, I'm
Right.
sure that at that point, whatever site it was brought to, you'd take care of the main girder situation. And yes,
I don't know. I'm just a country lawyer here. I'm not an
No,
engineer, but
I haven't
I
evaluated
yeah.
the requirements if the house had to be moved from its current site to a different site.
So, well, so hypothetically speaking, if you're saying, I'm hearing that you don't think the addition can be salvaged.
It would definitely be my recommendation, and I think it's the recommendation from our structural review that a footing and foundation would be inspected and required.
Okay.
Is not a feasible option to put in with the structure in place.
Because it's cost prohibitive, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, can I have just a few more? I'm sorry, I don't want me to dominate, because I know you have an agenda here. So, well, I'm just trying to figure out that if that wasn't, even if you couldn't save the addition, in theory, perhaps you could save the rest of it. I mean, you mentioned that there are some falling ceiling stuff, and after 7 years.
Again, the basement girders, the first
Yeah.
floor joist shows signs of rot, further settling along with deflection, fire exceeding code. The first and second floor interior bearing walls clearly settled due to the structural issues. So outside of the addition, there's still structural issues that would have to be
There's some issue.
significant to be addressed, yes.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Your name, sir?
David Timberlake. I'm a bud, 48 Outlook. We live 36 Outlook. And I agree with Mr. Sapien. It is a nice old house, and it does need paint. I bought the house right next door to it, same age, same general condition. 48 Outlook is a unique house. It's a bungalow. There's no other house like it in the development of Fair Oaks. It is unique. So we're not trying to prevent anything. We're just seeking the delay that's put forth by the statutes, as I understand it. So that's all we're looking for, not to prevent, just delay, probably so the neighborhood can get a better understanding of what could happen.
Okay. Thank you. Just one little question, please. Are there any plans about, in connection with this demolition, for the vacant lot next door?
We haven't gotten that far. Like, I haven't even surveyed the property yet. I mean, obviously, since I work in town, I was aware that it's on the list, and we decided that we should come and speak with the commission as our first step, and then decide, how the course goes from there.
No plans. Okay, thank you.
And I did have a question about, my name is Kathy Collins. Kathy.
Are you in a butter?
Yes, across, received the notice.
We live 72 Cross.
Okay,
Yeah,
Kathy Collins.
Just a matter of, since the lots are sort of undersized, as I take it, if you tear down, what is the restriction for what you build up? And I don't know whether this is something that comes here or...
We do not have jurisdiction to control what is put in place of a demolished structure.
If you demolish, sorry.
If the owner who wishes to demolish wishes to show us those plans, often it informs our decision because it helps us determine whether the streetscape will be maintained, whether the integrity of the neighborhood will be maintained in terms of materials and massing and this kind of thing. But it's not required, it's totally voluntary, and if you don't have it, that's fine. But we can't require it.
Okay, so obviously you haven't seen it.
We haven't seen any
at this point.
plans. Do you have plans for what you want to put there?
No, again, we haven't even surveyed the lot to get that information, and we haven't taken as far as any architectural plans of what we propose to build, because we knew this was our first hurdle that we had to clear first.
So the owner will be restricted by the zoning regulations in terms of setbacks, height, massing, but beyond that, there'll be no design review or control.
Then the question is, what zoning regulations take place? What are the zonings?
15-foot setbacks, 15-foot side lots.
The current ones.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
If they're 60-foot lots, then it's 10 foot.
You should follow current zoning for that particular.
Follow current zoning for that particular area. So if the lot is
Current zoning or?
No.
No, but at 60 feet, it's 10 foot setback. Not 50. But.
Earlier, Mr. Supp mentioned that the house has 3 very little bedrooms.
One's average size, and the front two are very small.
My understanding is that the frontage is only 50 feet in this lot?
I believe it's 55 maybe.
55.
But it could be 50.
In fact, the driveway doesn't even belong to this lot. My question is, if we are not to talk about the future plans, and you have no permit at this point, what size bedroom would you put, or how many bedrooms would you put in a 55-foot footprint?
Again, we haven't even survey the lot to see what size structure could be constructed.
50
I have
feet,
no
50 feet wide.
architectural plans or anything just yet.
55 feet is 55 feet, so.
Frank,
Yes.
do you have anything to say?
Has any attempt made to sell the house? I don't think, so we're not talking.
Again, right now Harry and Paula haven't made an attempt to sell the house. They consider moving back into it themselves, but in light of all the structural issues and so forth, they felt that it was just beyond what they could do to fix it and get it marketable.
I don't have another question.
Sarah?
So you are building for yourself, not for them. You are a purchaser, not a builder for the Sukworths.
That is correct, yes.
They, in light of the conditions, they determined they would not undertake the effort to repair the house.
Correct.
So you're applying on their behalf.
Correct.
Or you're not the owner?
I'm not the
correct?
owner, no. The Sukworths are currently the owner of the property.
I guess as an architect, I'm a little bit surprised by the brevity of a architectural survey of the property. And feel that it lacks the thoroughness and completeness to present a case that the house is structurally not repairable. And I guess, depending on the decision of the commission, that if you want the commission to reconsider, I would suggest that to have a structural engineer and to have a fairly detailed report as to the structural condition. And not a kind of a very brief one-paragraph summary. That I don't think presents very clearly exactly what is happening structurally and what is not happening structurally.
If I can ask, was this the summary of a more detailed report that was prepared for you?
No, that was the summary.
This is it?
Yeah, from the architect structural review.
And I guess I would also suggest that a structural assessment should be made by a structural engineer, with all due respect to my colleagues.
I think imposing the delay would not really set this project back very far, because there's a lot of issues that you still have to settle. I mean, you're way in the beginning of the project, so I suspect that imposing the delay you could go ahead with a lot of things that you need to consider. Whether
Surveying architectural plans could happen quickly.
There's a lot more
Those
to
are
do.
primarily things that we'd have to do.
And the other thing is, of course, you can come back, if you tried to market the house, for example, which the bylaw addresses, you could come back anytime within the year. You understand, you don't have to wait a year to come back before the commission. If you feel that you're more in compliance with the terms of the demolition delay bylaw, you can come in anytime.
Any other comments from the commission?
Well, I'd like to say it is a very classic bungalow style house. And we don't have many of them. We have fewer and fewer small houses in Lexington every minute, I suspect, certainly every day. I hear what you're saying, that the Fair Oaks neighborhood started off to be something different than what it evolved into, but it evolved into something fairly cohesive in a fairly short period of time after that. And that's an early to mid 20th century suburban neighborhood. The lot size and the type of house is exactly what people like you were doing in 1925. They were coming to Lexington and saying, this is the ideal place for me to build a house just like this. So where you're dealing with a community standard that may not be today's community standard, but it's definitely the community standard of a great deal of the development of this community. So, and we've seen some good, I think, cooperation and a spirit of negotiation and mediation from the Fair Oaks neighborhood in particular in working around mediating the loss of individual buildings. I think if the vacant lot next door comes into play with part of this development, I think that would essentially create a different project. And you would need to, in my opinion, you would need to return to the commission with a new application based on joint ownership of both lots, were that to be something that you pursued. I'm not sure whether it's even in consideration for you, but if that were the case, I think that I would argue and ask that the building inspector commissioner bring it back to us as a new application. That you would be voiding the first one and then returning to demolish the house in with a different set of circumstances. But the thing that I think has been really heartening and that we've seen before from the Fair Oaks neighborhood is a real consciousness of the significance of their neighborhood, a desire to see it protected and preserved in some way, and a willingness to work with developers to create new construction in the context of the buildings that are there. So my underlying point behind this is that if there's a way in which you can add on to this building, that you can retain this building and connect it to another building, clearly it needs work. You'll have to jack it up, put a new foundation under it, scissor all the joists, do all the new framing, pull out all the rotted plaster, redo the wiring. We know you're going to do that. That's what, I mean, even people who have a 1960s house do that, even if it's not falling apart. So that is not really a big argument for me, because I think it's pretty standard. But I do think that we would be heartened to see you look at reusing the building in some fashion, maybe as part of a larger development. So that'd be my comment.
Just one further comment, and that is you stated at one point that if the house were to be restored, you would have to strip the entire exterior of the house. This is the kind of destruction that is not in keeping with historic preservation.
It's vinyl siding.
Well, take the vinyl siding off, but find out what's underneath.
Right.
Because the original clapboards or shingles or whatever was used may be, and are in many cases, still viable.
That would be something that I potentially could consider, but obviously the vinyl siding would be something I'd want to remove.
That historic preservation doesn't dictate the stripping of, the whole exterior of the house. I didn't know that vinyl siding. I mean, take that off. That's fine. But don't do what other builders in Lexington do routinely, and that is strip everything down to the sheathing and start over again with manufactured wood, which is not historically correct. So consider that, if you would.
Our bylaw permits us to find that demolition would be detrimental. I just lost it. If our bylaw states that if we find the demolition of a significant building would be detrimental to the historical or architectural heritage resources of the town, such building shall be considered a preferably preserved significant building. And if we so find that this building is preferably preserved, then we can instruct the building commissioner not to issue a demolition permit until we are satisfied there is no reasonable likelihood that either the owner or such other person is willing to purchase, preserve, rehabilitate, or restore the building, or we are satisfied that the owner has made continuing bona fide and reasonable efforts to locate a purchaser to preserve, rehabilitate, and restore the building, and that such efforts have been unsuccessful, or a period of 12 months shall have elapsed since the date of this hearing. Do I have a motion as to how to proceed?
I guess based on what Wendell has said about the lack of sufficient evidence that the home is not likely to be purchased by me, I would move that we find this house preferably preserved for that reason, the lack of sufficient documentation as to the poor structural integrity of the house.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Are we there? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time
The delay is
tonight.
imposed until, what is today?
December 13th.
December 13th next year. Unless you come before the commission at such earlier time that you can establish that there is no likelihood that anyone will purchase, preserve, or rehabilitate the building, or that reasonable efforts have been made to sell it to someone who will do that and make them unsuccessful. And that can happen at any time between now and next December.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for putting up with these conditions.
Do you want me to go out there and call the next hearing?
I think so, yes.
It's good.
I hope everybody here shows up to town meeting
I'm
with Karen
happy.
Hall
I'm
as
very
we talk
happy.
about for renovation to deal with acoustical issues.
Okay, right.
It's not always like this.
I think that's what they had.
Yes, I had it.
They can come back at any time.
But neighborhoods.
Well, ultimately, the neighborhood forms a decision.
David. I'm Al Montgomery. Hi, Magnet Lab. Yes, of course. Good to see you again. I'm at number 49, right across the street.
Thank you.
We have in the last some show views from the public. It's a which way they lean, because we don't hear from most of them. I don't know, I just mentioned it.
We have them?
We have done that. Well, I mean, to me, it's an indication from everybody who's come, because you don't hear from
Oh, sure.
most of them.
No, I get you.
Jill.
I don't know. Thank you all for being patient with us and waiting outside. We did not want the fire department.
What am I doing here for?
We are now holding a public hearing on the demolition of 9 Revere Street. We are holding it at 7:50 p.m. on the application of the estate of Alfred Tootin, Joe Butler, with respect to the building, with respect to demolishing the building located at 9 Revere Street, at the hearing any party, whether entitled to, I can't read this, whether entitled to notice thereof or not, may appear in person or be represented by an agent or attorney. Are the applicants here?
Hi, yes, my name's Joseph Butler, and,
And were you outside for the last one?
I'm sorry?
You were outside?
Yes.
Were you here when I told you about the procedures? I can't remember when I kicked everybody out. What we will do is we will have you present your case. We will ask for comments and questions from the audience, that we will then ask for comments and questions from the commission, and then we will vote.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. My name's Joseph J. Butler, and I'm here to request the demolition of 9 Revere Street. And we were notified by Jeff Meany, the nephew of late Alfred Tootin, shortly after his passing, to see what could be done with the property at 9 Revere Street itself. We went over there, met with Jeff, who was representing his mother Sarah and her sister. They wanted to settle the estate. In the meantime, we have closed on the property, and we currently own it in trust. And we went out and we hired an architect. His name is Nick Maynard from Lincoln. We hired a structural engineer. His name is Stephen Siegel out of Newton. And then civil engineer Jim Keenan. And environmental engineer Patricia Riley to evaluate the existing house. And I don't know if you've each had a chance to look at the packets, their letters. If you want me to review those, I'd be happy to. Or we can just summarize.
Oh, Kim, I'm sorry.
I think if you could review the key points of your submission, I would appreciate it.
Okay, sure. Yep. Let's start with Nick Maynard, the architect. He basically went through the, looked at the surroundings of the neighborhood, walked through the existing structure, basically came to a summary that it was a modest house. The historical narrative of this building was unremarkable. The combined factors of condition, code, and contemporary living norms conspired to make a proper renovation very expensive. If the house were better sited on the lot, located in a neighborhood of consistent and historical style in better condition, and presented a compelling plan, I might advocate for the preservation, but at this point, the work and cost of rejuvenating it is very hard to justify. For these reasons, I feel demolishing the house is a reasonable and advisable course of action. So if you walked into the house, you go up to the second floor. To get to the back of the house, you have to walk through this single bathroom, an older bathroom, that goes to an addition that was done to the structure, and I don't know exactly what dates the additions were done. According to the architect, he feels they were done pretty close after the original construction. But that whole addition from the main house back is on a crawl space, dirt, rubble foundation. And it also steps down about 14 to 15 inches, so there's a couple steps down. So it's not adverse living conditions on the second floor with one bedroom and the bedrooms. Moving on to the structural engineer, Stephen Siegel. We have worked on numerous projects with Steve, and he went through the project again and found that the foundation, excuse me, was made of irregular stone, laid in place, chinked with mortar. Staining in particular on the front wall indicated water flows through the foundation wall. The basement floor is thin poured concrete slab. Headroom from top of slab to underside of joist is 6 foot 6 inches. And the dimension for the clear passage is reduced by pipes and ducts. First floor framing visible from the basement, 2x8s at 19 inches on center, spanning 14.5 feet. First floor framing on the rear addition spans over humid crawl space with little as a foot of clearance of crawl space soils. The framing measures 2x6 at 16 on center, spanning 12 feet, supports midspan. This is evident of termite damage to the framing to the rear of the addition. There's also termite damage in the roof rafters as well that we found. And we don't know what the extent of the termite damage is. Again, the barn on the back of the main house is sitting on dirt, and it smells of rotted wood permeates the barn. So there was no foundation under the existing barn. In summary, he said, the building can be renovated and brought into modern code compliance. But to achieve this, a builder must perform reinforcement and/or replacement of most of the floor and roof framing. Also, work to upgrade the stone foundation walls is difficult and dangerous. Although this level of rebuilding may comply technically with local historic commission wish, it can hardly be objective of that body to maintain the shape of the original building while leaving very little of the original framing or foundation. For this reason, we recommend removal and replacement of the house and barn at 9 Revere Street. Moving on, we did an environmental test. There's high levels of lead, not only underneath the vinyl cladding outside, but also in all the interior moldings and woodwork. Also, there's asbestos flooring in the bathrooms and kitchen area that would have to be removed. And there's also a lot of mold in the basement. The smell of mold actually through the whole house, on the first and second floors, especially where the areas are sitting on dirt. And there's full lead and asbestos reports attached. We also had Jim Keenan, land surveyor, local land surveyor, do a surveying of the property. We have some setback issues pertaining to there's a bump out in the dining room area that's only 4.5 feet off the lot line, and the main house on both corners is approximately 10 feet off the lot line. So if we were to renovate the existing structure, we would have to get special permit and variances to accommodate any additional additions to the structure.
But not to keep the house as it is.
Correct.
And in fact, I just want to also comment that it is not necessary when you're doing historic preservation of a house to bring it up to modern code. That's not required. Unless you change the staircases, unless you change the ceilings, unless you make major structural changes. If you kept the house the way it is, it may not meet the modern code,
Yeah.
but that's allowed.
It is if you have somebody that wants to live there, right? In that
Different issue.
In that condition.
Different issue.
Yeah.
Continue, sorry.
So we took photographs of the existing house. It's completely vinyl cladded. All the trim on the exterior has aluminum clad. In the professionals, in the architect's eyes, there's not much as far as historical value left in this particular house, based on the photos and based on what the previous owner had done. The barn itself was completely skinned and sheathed in T111. I assume there was some old siding that was removed and replaced. There's also 2x4 reinforced collar ties up in the attic that were used. There's evidence of termites in the main house in this photo.
Where, do you have a report to that effect? I didn't see it. Termites?
No, just the observations from the structural engineer. It was in his letter.
So, but you didn't include that with us, I don't think.
The structural engineers.
The structural engineer
Second.
made the
Talk
comment.
about termites?
But we're showing you a picture of a rafter
Okay, I
that
just didn't read
had
termites.
that had termite damage.
Number 4, all right, got it.
There's also peeling lead paint on the walls throughout the house.
I don't think your lead person said that. I think your lead person said the lead paint was in the casings, window and door casings.
Yeah.
Trim, not on the walls. I didn't see it in the report, but I didn't read every page of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, to be honest with you. I'd have to look at the report. But,
All interior and exterior painted woodwork,
There's an
some
area of
plaster walls
plaster
and
walls.
paint.
yeah, I thought they said plaster walls as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a picture of the crawl space, excuse me, the kitchen of the kitchen, the outdated kitchen, and also a picture of the crawl space.
People would kill for these, for the sink.
Well, I'm sure he'll think about salvaging the sink. I'm sure you noticed that the sink has some value.
Oh, yeah.
For somebody that wants it, sure.
Well, I mean, you see them in
I
the
just put a sink
magazines.
identical to it in my house 2 weeks ago. I bought it first 10 years ago, and I finally put it just like it.
People buy old clowns.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Also a picture of the main electrical service coming in, fuse boxes, 60 amp service coming in. The electrical and the plumbing would have to be completely upgraded. The chimney itself is blown, excuse me, has water damage coming in from the inside, ruining the mortar joints. Also a picture of the stairway going down the back. The stairway, the existing stairways, as was mentioned, are not to code, so they would all have to be reworked and brought up to code. And a window with a towel.
Custom insulation. So has it participated? Yeah, okay. Sure.
Are there comments from the public?
I walked through the house. And,
Could we have your name, please, Sam?
Oh, Carol Halewood. I live on March 1.
Carol Holloway?
Halewood.
Halewood.
Yeah. And I walked through the house and because I was really surprised because I always thought that it was a nice property from the outside. But I found it a negative experience because it was so, the ceilings were so low and I have low ceilings in my house, but they don't come across as low as that house. And it was just a depressing atmosphere in it because it had never been taken care of. And why didn't someone tell them they couldn't put aluminum siding on it? You know, why, if you're gonna have a preservation, why don't we have preservation every time they want to do a project? I mean, the house had very little of the historic charm left in it, mostly from neglect, I think.
That kind of regulation is true in the historic districts,
Okay.
but it is not true outside the historic districts.
That's it, okay.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, Peter Tropiano, 19 New Jersey Street. I've lived there since 1942. I used to chum with the Tootens and with the kids. And when I first came to this meeting, I came here to object the house coming down because I love the historic value and so forth. But after looking at the house today, just going by and looking at it, I have changed my mind on this. A big factor being contingent on what's going to be put there. Something along with the same character of the neighborhood, so to speak, would be my only thing that I'd want to see. But as far as trying to save this house, I know they haven't done any maintenance to it.
Unfortunately, this commission does not have any authority to control what goes back on the lot. That's kind of up to the builder and how much attention he wants to pay to the neighbors in getting their input as to what they think is appropriate for their neighborhood. But we have nothing we can't.
Can I say something?
Yes, sir.
My name is Clayton Stewart, and I'm an immediate abutter at 7A Revere Street. And not only is this a nice presentation that, yes, the house is, Chip Tooten, who passed away, was a super gentleman, but he wasn't capable of doing anything for the house. I have known Joe for 25, 30 years, and every structure he's put up, my wife and I would move into it in a heartbeat. He and his wife have excellent taste, and they've always done a nice job, and I'm sure whatever they put there will be an enhancement to the neighborhood. So we are fully behind his plans.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jill Butler, and I'm obviously Joe's wife. And we lived in this neighborhood in the past, and we've missed it since we've been away. We've lived in Winthrop Road, where I grew up, in an old Victorian that we actually did restore, de-leaded, took all the moldings off. You know, we're certainly all for that if something is worth doing. We have since built a house on Foster Road that I felt was very in keeping with the neighborhood. It was shingle style, and now that they've put humongous houses around it, is one of the smaller houses. except for the existing ranches. And we are now at North Street. We have moved quite a bit. We both grew up in this town. We love this town, and we really want to move back to this neighborhood. We're now empty nesters. So I just want to say that it's important to us that it be a home that fits into the neighborhood. Where, as I said, empty nesters, we're actually trying to scale down. So I think the house, compared to what a lot of builders would put there at this point, if we are going to be put into the position of putting it on the market, you know, we are hoping to move back to this neighborhood. But of course, money does become an issue. I know that's not your issue, but it is our issue, and we want a house that is obviously up to code. I mean, even though we don't have little kids ourselves, I hope to have grandchildren, you know, with low railings on the upstairs staircase. You know, there's just so many things that need to be done. And I know that in the bathroom, it was allowed to leak down into the dining room area. And you didn't even mention that. I mean, you can see the mold on the ceiling. I just feel like it would have to be totally gutted. And I don't know what would be preserved on the outside by the time you get through with it, but I am totally interested in having a house that fits into the neighborhood, that would look nice, that's practical, but also up to code and has some character. We don't know exactly what the house would look like at this point, because we haven't really had that much time, since it's only been about a month since we bought it. But so that's all I can say. I mean, if we put it on the market, I don't know what, you know, would happen within a year. So.
My name is Charlotte Persciano, and I live at 6 Larchmont Lane. And again, I've known Joe and Jill for 25 plus years probably, and I'm very excited to think that they might be coming back to the neighborhood. And I too have thought this house was charming because I'm 2 houses away, until I actually got to see the inside of it. And sadly, it has been totally let go for probably since the 40s. And I am certainly in favor of having something put up that's tasteful, that fits the lot, but at least kind of within keeping of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else have? Yeah. Anyone else? No? Frank.
As to its architectural significance, its provenance, the fact that there is a Mass Historic data sheet on this house describing previous owners and what is architecturally significant about it, that is reason enough for me to consider it so. We don't usually, unless you have a PhD in architectural history or whatever, we don't usually consider the opinions of the public as to its historical significance as being relevant. We pay an architectural historian to go around the town and prepare this inventory. And they're the experts, and they tell us what is or what is not significant. So the fact that it is in the inventory, it is listed separately, is proof enough to me that it is significant, as well as my own personal appreciation for the property. However, I find that what the neighbors have said about the condition of the house only, several people have been in it and have testified as to the poor condition of the interior of the house. And I've heard about the exterior. I don't know if Wendell finds the evidence compelling enough that it is, that you would actually have to do what constitutes a demolition to save this house, removing one wall, removing the roof, that I don't see any choice.
I did a little more research on the house today. It was lived in, I think it was probably built by a man named Benjamin Gleason, who was a farmer. It's on the 1875 map, which says to me, and to me it looks earlier than that. It looks like an 1860s house. It has the long windows that you would see on a Greek Revival or an Italianate. Now things get delayed. It could be could be 1875, but I think it's probably more like 1860 to 1870 in age. It's hard to tell when there's vinyl siding on there, but those windows are quite a giveaway. The chimney that you referred to is clearly a 1940s, 30s, 40s chimney that was added for a heating system. It's not the original chimney. If it peeled off the house tomorrow, it would be no loss to anybody other than the heating system. The barn is a barn. We don't have barns in Lexington. We've always protected houses with barns in Lexington because this is the way that people lived in Lexington before World War II. They had spaces like this. The subsequent owner after Benjamin Gleason was an English person who'd come from England in 1870s. He was named Samuel Holloway. He was a gilder. He was a skilled carpenter. He was probably a carver. He probably framed pictures. He was a gilder. He came from Stratford-on-Avon. He lived near Bath. He grew up near Bath, where they did a lot of gilding. So they have a lot of fancy buildings. He died there in 1921. I don't know who would have lived there after that, but he and his family lived there from the 1880s through the 1920s. To me, the house has nothing wrong with it that people who want to save and live in an old building can't fix. To me, it has everything wrong with it that people who don't want to do that will find wrong with it. I spent 3 hours in a house in Brookline that's probably 20 years older than this, equally chopped up. The change in the floor levels between the addition, clearly the addition is an addition. It wasn't meant to be contiguous or to suit your bedroom layout for today. It was not probably even meant to be occupied. It was probably just storage above there. And at some point when the bathroom went in, they just put a door in and put a step down and said, let's finish it off. So the fact that the rooms are small, the fact that the ceilings are low, the fact that the staircase is crooked, the fact that the barn has had its siding taken off, the fact that it has vinyl siding on the outside means nothing to me. I think it's a building well worth saving and well worth fixing, even if it's in bad condition, even if it's gutted and put all new siding on it, because frankly, that happens in the historic district. So sadly, the fact that it says that no one on the historical commission would want to deal with a building, the only thing that was left of it was the original shape. That's not necessarily so. So I'd be really sad to see this gone. It's there. I would, if we went around Lexington, there's a map of Lexington in 1875. If you went around Lexington and counted all of the houses that are still standing in Lexington from 1875, you'd be hard pressed. I don't know how many there were originally, but there's a lot less now. So I'm just absolutely opposed to taking it down permanently, but obviously I only have 12 months.
Randall.
I share virtually everything that Sally has said about the significance of the house. I also find the Siegel Associate Structural Engineering report seems to be thoroughly done, seems to document no single case that is unrepairable, but the number of structural items is significant. And the Cavino report, in terms of the mold, I think likewise.
I actually looked up, the mold is not, the type of mold that's in there is not a type of particularly difficult to deal with or dangerous mold. So I did. I said, I'm going to find out what that mold is before, it's bread mold. My husband, when he heard that it was bread mold, said, oh, so it has bread mold, so now the house is toast.
But there wasn't a definitive mold test done. That was just an observation from.
Well, they did a mold test.
Yeah.
They said what type of mold it was.
Yeah, but she said that to go further,
Okay,
she should do a thorough, another test.
yeah.
Well, I love to hear neighbors say that they like to have you back in the neighborhood and that you grew up in Lexington, the two of you, and I think it's wonderful. I didn't grow up in Lexington, but I feel like I did because I've been here forever. But I live in a house that had all the things wrong with it that this house had plus, and it is now about 80% or 90% restored. It's taken me 30 years. I don't require anybody to do that. But it can be done. It can be done. And, you know, here's a house that has a history, fits the neighborhood. It's a livable, you know, it could be a livable house. And as far as the additions go, if you want to put an addition on the back, saying preserve this house, the setbacks I don't think are going to be a big issue. I haven't, it looks like you got quite a bit of room behind it on the lot. And that can be done if it was a tasteful addition, for example, and we encourage that sort of thing. Because we know people don't want to live in small rooms. I live in small rooms, I have a very small house.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody wants to do that. But so I would encourage you to take another look at this in view of what's been said here. And again, you can come back before the commission anytime. And if it's not feasible, well, 12 months from now, you could take it down anyway, but the whole idea of the delay is to give a chance for you or someone else to see if they can't preserve the house.
I'd just like to say, this is a really remarkable report, and you've done an incredible job to do that much documentation, especially in a month. So it's really quite, this is the best probably that we've almost ever seen.
Okay.
Anyone want to make a motion one way or the other?
I would move that we find that this building is significant and appropriately preserved on the basis of the documentation. It's prima facie perfectly preserved on the basis that it's included on the inventory, and that the owner be encouraged to look into rehabilitating it.
I'd second that.
In favor? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? Okay. You have a year. You have a year during which we would hope that you try to find a way to preserve the home. If within that year you find that it is absolutely impossible to do so, that is, it's not just that there's mold in there, but the mold can't be removed. It's not just that there's asbestos in there, but the asbestos can't be safely moved without prohibitive cost. If you find that the siding, we encourage you to take the vinyl siding off. If you find out that the termites have been partying since 1920 behind there, that's the kind of thing you need to come back and say to us, and we will say fine. But we would like you to make that attempt to try to see if the house can be preserved, and if all else fails, after a year, you can demolish it without our having any more input into it.
Very good. I don't know what else to say, but you certainly don't consider a cost an issue.
Unfortunately, we don't.
No.
Can I ask you a question? I apologize. I think that one of the observations is that to restore the house, the roof has to come off because the beams are all rotten, and the floors, the fieldstone basement, which is leaking, the house has to be raised up for a new foundation to be put underneath. The vinyl siding, which was put on, what was it, 30 years ago? About 35 years ago when we first moved to Lexington, there's no idea of the damage underneath it. And as far as architectural importance, there's a house right next door with almost the exact same blueprint. So if this Italianate, I forget the exact title of it, is not that unique, and the house would, as I say, to restore it, you'd have to tear it down to rebuild it. And anyone that would tear it down in today's world probably is not going to restore it. It's not like it has any great, from my observation, historical redeeming features.
I would take strong issue with you on your statement that it has to be torn down to restore it.
How else do you get the beams in a roof? So you have to take a roof off to put the beams on.
Not true. It happens all the time. I mean, houses are restored standing the way they are.
The foundation was built to have a mortar which is very loose. It can be repointed. It can even be repointed with a clay and sand mortar, which is maybe what it had to begin with. But repointing the foundation is certainly possible. Shoring up the foundation, you don't have to jack it up to do it. You don't have to. You can sister beams. The roof does not have to come off in order for it to be repaired. It can be done from the inside. I hear what you're saying. I know Carol from Cambridge. She knows me from the Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District, I think. And I'm sorry that I feel that way, but we don't, I live on North Street. I'm one of your neighbors.
Okay,
I watched your house be built.
okay.
Your new house.
Yep.
That you are leaving.
We live now,
Yeah.
We live there now. But I have to stress the structural engineer's report, which he had mentioned. Once you start sistering joists,
I hear what you're
ripping
saying.
up floors, foundations, you open up a can of worms.
I work for Historic New England.
Okay,
And
you
we
open up a
have
can of worms.
36 houses from
Yep.
1670 to 1930
Yep.
that are museum houses that have to be preserved because they have to be, because they're
Yep.
museums.
Yep.
So I know that with significant effort, anything can be done. I also know from 20 years of experience working in Cambridge with houses, with many houses that are in condition very similar to this, that they are restored or repaired. They're not restored, they're rehabilitated. Restoration is, I think, one of the maybe terms that gets a little confusing because people think they have to put it back exactly the way it was. No, you're talking about rehabilitation with mostly new material. But that preserves a sense of the streetscape, a sense of the scale, a sense of the presence in the neighborhood that you just don't get with a new house. You just don't. Even though you want to make it look good and it's going to be attractive.
I just have a question, because there is a house down the street that, they have the old house, and I think it's
The blue one?
an L shape, it's gray. It's right next to the bike path. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, is that more desirable than building a house that is, good for the lot, setback, I don't know.
I don't know either.
And with the barn there, would that limit us to, and does that mean we have to keep the barn also? I don't know if that's a separate issue, I'm just.
Well, you don't have to do anything. I mean, you can do what you want.
Right.
It's just that the advice that this process is designed to, what this process is designed to do is to tell you, we think you have something that's worth saving. Or at least thinking about really seriously. And then once that a little more thought has gone into it, then you can come back and
If demolishing the barn would help you save the house, at least individually be very supportive of it.
because you create
It's a very depressing house.
Well, it's depressing now, but believe me, I've been in depressing houses that are wonderful after they've had work done to them. I mean, I think,
Of course.
yeah, that's what preservation is supposed to be, is supposed to do. It's supposed to look at what we have and to work with what we've got and to try to make it last a little bit longer. It's a better built house than you would think. I think it was probably built by the man next door, who was a builder. named
Well, it says
Sidney
here the
Butters.
builder's unknown. I know that you've done some history, but
The next door guy was named Sidney Butters,
Yeah.
like your guy.
that is mentioned.
Yep,
Yeah.
and he was a carpenter. And so I'm guessing he built both of them. So when they were built well for their time. Thank you.
Yep.
Charlotte? Sure, it's Rashida. F-R-U-C-I-A-N.
Yeah.
Well, 22 DeMar. Which, he's not here, I'll go out and get him. Oh, is he?
Yeah.
I don't think he's here from DeMar? I'll yell for it. Because I don't see them. Is anyone here for 22 DeMar?
We did.
Hi.
You here for 22 tomorrow?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. The logistics have been made it such that everything is delayed a little bit.
Are you David? I'm Teresa.
Yes, I'm.
Yeah. It's on the first one.
We are holding a public hearing on the, excuse me, on the application of 22 DeMar Road LLC, David King, with respect to demolishing the building located at 22 DeMar Road. At the hearing, any party, whether or not entitled to notice thereof or not, may appear in person or be represented by an agent or attorney. Mr. King,
Yes.
please.
Well, this project is more an addition renovation. It's not really intended to be a demolition. We intend to keep the original house intact, and we had already applied for a permit when, oh, excuse me, I should introduce, this is Jeff D'Agostino, who's the builder on the project. And when he was speaking with the building inspector, and he said that the sheathing was rotten and he'd have to replace some of the rafters. So we're basically rebuilding the whole roof. Then the building inspector said we should appear before you all. So, but the intention of the project is basically to keep the original building and build an addition to it.
That's great.
The original house, this is a, you have some plans, this is a rough drawing from the street. The original house is 1950s tech-built Carl Koch, and you all probably know more about these houses than we do. But it's slab on grade, panelized construction, and aluminum windows that are pretty worn out, and the foundation walls come up 3 feet from the slab. So we basically want to keep the same scheme of the front elevation, partly because on the side elevation, the south, we cannot insulate the lower floor of the building. We'd like to use the lower floor as a garage, and so we're taking out some windows on the south side and on the west side.
South being the back of the property from the street.
Right. And so we're trying to the addition is connected to the original home with the hyphen, which becomes the entry. And with the addition, we're trying to respect the language of the original building and of the neighborhood.
So specifically, you'll just be removing that back wall to attach
That's right.
the addition?
That's right.
And replacing the roof? No.
Yes.
Yes.
And the windows?
Windows
Yes.
and the siding.
And the siding.
And the siding.
siding.
The new roof will be identical
Yes.
Yes.
to the old roof, yeah.
Same eve detail.
Yeah, just looks fine.
Does anyone have any comments from the audience?
I actually like it, I live next door.
Yes, ma'am. Your name, please?
Elizabeth Rogers. And I like this design. My great fear was that, something totally inappropriate to the contemporary architecture of the neighborhood would go in there. Because I knew that this house had not been well maintained for many, many years and was likely to be a tear down or something close to that. And in talking to neighbors, our big concern was some sort of colonial or something that really would not fit with a street that's entirely contemporary architecture. So I think this is about as good as it gets, really, is that we're gonna have the original house with a, an addition that's up to date and all of that. I mean, I'm quite happy with it.
Anyone else?
Frank?
No, I think this is probably the best that we could hope for, to have a modification to an existing structure. That's great, in keeping with the architectural style. It's a little taller than the original,
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think it is great. Anyway.
I think you've confronted the problem that mid-century modern buildings confront all the time, which is that the materials are kind of shot in a lot of cases. And you're replacing basically, to me it looks like you've really taken the module of the original house and worked from that and are keeping entirely within the spirit of the original housekeeping. The original house, it's interesting to use the bottom floor as garage, but that's coming in from not from the street is there, but it's a little protected from the street. I can't.
You have the side thing, I think.
It looked like it was from the side rather than.
It is the side,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's a really nice attachment, really sensitive way to attach the building without overwhelming the massively smaller original, so it looks great.
Randall?
I likewise want to extend compliments for your effort to respect the original building with an appropriate addition and renovation.
I make a motion that we allow this, subject to all of the comments and conditions which have been presented to the commission.
Can I make a question before we do that?
Of course.
We looked at the siding, and we originally did not go with the original siding because it was prohibitive to do it on the whole project. But can we have some flexibility in the siding? We might consider vertical siding or
Or a 4-inch exposure clap as opposed to a 6-inch exposure is what's there right now.
We don't have review at that level.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I agree with you that vertical siding that high might look kind of funny, actually.
Yeah,
Or
I
it'd be
think it might
really
look funny,
hard
yeah.
to find.
Yeah. And the other question is, there's a pane of glass here, but it's a split level, the original building. Would there be any objection if we used a wood panel there?
I was actually going to say, take a look at Ann Grady's house, which is the only tech-built house in the Peacock Farm neighborhood. It's at 10 Trotting Horse Drive,
Mhm.
4 Trotting Horse
Yeah,
Drive, something
right.
like that. And she's got great original colors on there, and the MDO or whatever it was then panels, and that's it's a clever way to resolve sort of joints and
Yeah.
connections.
Because right now the panel spans 2 floors and we're going to put floor building in between, so it'd be cumbersome to try to deal with it.
Yeah.
I'd like to second David's motion.
All those in favor? Do you have something for us to sign?
Me?
You
The
should
proposal.
have a demo permit form.
Conditions to be attached or something.
We're subject to plans
Plans
submitted.
presented.
Yeah, exactly. So, and submitted it.
Nice thing is that the testimony
26
given
November
before the
12th.
commission is now all recorded. And we've found out that that's the legal record. Complete with mugshots.
Wish I'd comb my hair.
You should comply.
I have a question, and if it's not appropriate to ask at this hearing, I can just ask one of you later, but if they had wanted to just start from scratch with all new materials, just get rid of that, but still build in the same footprint and the same contemporary compatible design like it was, but just decide that they just wanted to start with new materials, is that an issue?
You
Would that have
cannot
been an issue?
build an old house. You cannot build a historic house. You can only build a new house.
Right.
And our job is to preserve architecturally and historically significant housing. So the history, the people who lived there, the people who were born there, the people who died there, the people who maintained it, all of that is lost the day the bulldozer arrives. So the idea, I know it's a little romantic idea that the house has a soul, but on the other hand, there's a lot of history that went on in the house, and even mid-century modern houses. So those people who are rabid passionate about old houses, perhaps more so than I should be, always want to preserve the old house. And the other thing is that a lot of what was put into those houses, I live in a 1780 house, and all the beams that say 2x4 on them are 2 inches by 4 inches. They're not 1.5 by 3.5. The materials, the workmanship is hard to come by today.
Yes.
I know they do it, but there are people out there with 22 caliber nail guns, putting houses up, and I suppose it's fine. But when you live in a house that's 200 or 250 years old and you realize it's been there all those years and it's not going to go away, it's a good feeling. So there's a feeling to a house. And
Even if it was built in 1960?
yeah. No, I understand, but
I agree.
the history.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. The next hearing, I'm not going to stand up for a minute, so I'm going to do the standing for 2 minutes.
And maybe you leave the door open, but cool off the room.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's quiet.
Quiet it down a lot.
12 We are now going to have a public hearing on the application of Kevin Sue? Shoot. You can leave that open though, I think, unless it's real.
Yeah, okay.
With respect to demolishing the building located at 12 Bicentennial Way, at the hearing, any party, whether entitled to notice thereof or not, may appear in person or be represented by an agent or attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Chu. I recently purchased this property. I'm here to thank you for the time, and appreciate your talking with me today on my request of potentially for demolishing. Should I just proceed with
Yes,
my...
please, I'm sorry,
okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Since I've bought the house, this is really just since November, and I don't have a lot of time to prepare for the material yet, but I think I did a little bit of homework. And I understand what the commission is looking for. I'm trying my best here. So the the condition of the house, as I listed here, was in the last couple weeks we've experienced many issues, as I have talked with the tenant as well, that I have gone in multiple times to try to correct. There was tremendous complexity built into the house throughout the years, whether it's utility, all kinds of mixed uses across the front and the back of the house, which is an in-law apartment. And then the energy efficiency of the place is, from what I heard, is cost quite a bit of money for heating and cooling as well. It has been, from what I understand, a long-term rental. The last owner that I bought from has not been living there for a long time as well. So from the tenant who was there, lived there for the last few years, what I've heard is that they didn't put any funds into maintaining the structure or helping to maintain any features of the house. So that's one of the reasons that I want to talk to you about. The other things that I really is just like what I've heard today as well, that I'm not a PhD or any kind of historian or architect programs, that I have some observations and questions regarding this. Hopefully it makes sense here, that throughout, based on some of the research I've done, the historical record that I've attached here as well, some major alterations has already happened in 1918 and 1978, and I couldn't tell, and nor did the report indicate that how much was the original still in place. Secondly, just based on my limited knowledge, some of the key landmarks, like what's mentioned in the report, the two-story 15-stall barn, which was very representative of the time frame and the owner before that they owned it for the farmland, which was this area has been demolished around the 1970s, and just a huge development, I think, around the Cary farm area during the 1970s. Basically, everything has been torn down and gone, including much more historical significant buildings or structures. That this was basically, at this point, when I look around that area, it was the only thing that had anything to do with probably that history. From what I read as well, this was one of the caretaker's house for the farmhouse, and wasn't sort of the significant Cary family estate. And I kept trying to read more of the survey, and I think all it has to a lot of comments regarding the estate itself, which is somewhere else, but not this particular value on the caretaker's house. So that's all I could find. I want to chat with you and see what your opinions are. Thank you.
Are there comments from the audience?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
So, first of all, Kevin, I'm one of your neighbors, but I've never met you. I'm Peter Mueller.
Thank you. It was very short. Another time at the next
Welcome
meet you. Yes.
to the neighborhood. Hi. So I live in 16 Bicentennial, and I say it's the first time I've ever been to one of these meetings. I'm impressed with the passion I've heard so far. I don't know if you know the anatomy of the neighborhood around there. This was the original. I moved in about 1981, and it's a Ted Freeman development. A lot of you people know him, so they're fairly standard houses, 4 or 5 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. That's a very tight area of the neighborhood. I live sort of on the end. My backyard looks out over your property. We're very close. Next to me, there was supposed to be a swimming pool apparently in the original development. Some changes were made at the last minute, and the house is actually quite close to mine, number 14, and that means we have 2 houses quite close to this original house. This is the original farmhouse of the land. It was a big farm area. The houses were all built about 1976, but this, you may know when the original house was built, but I think it was way back in at least the 30s, maybe. But maybe you probably know better than I do.
1850?
1850s, well, I'm not sure what I know about history, I guess, but it is, I would think, a historic house. So, you know, I have two issues I've got to say, and I hate to do this because we've hardly met. We haven't met. But one, it's the original farmhouse. From the outside, it looks nice. Number two, not a big piece of land to have one of these big knockdown Lexington houses. There's no land in the back, because I border it, and the Weekses, who's actually a builder in Lexington, Greg Weeks, is right next to me, and we're already too close to each other, so there's not a lot of room. So, you know, I just wonder how that would fit into that sort of small anatomic area. You know, I've already suffered, I think, the consequences of the Shade Street knockdowns and big houses, destroying some of the woods behind our house and my neighbor's house. Not that the neighbors are horrible people, but, you know, the woods are gone, so the natural habitat has changed. And that's just in the last 30 years since I've been there. I still don't understand why the houses were so packed in close to us, but that's not your issue. So I must say I'm not excited about another knockdown for two reasons. I guess one, because this is an older historic house, and two, really because of the contiguity to a very small piece of the neighborhood. I mean, I could draw what it looks like up there, but you probably, you know, have the architect. Maybe you don't have the architect. I don't know if you want me to draw it, Mary, because it probably would be to scale. But anyway, so that's my feeling on it. I hate to say it, but that's why I'm here for the first time ever.
Well, thank you. Can I make a comment on that as well? Yeah? Or if you...
To respond. You want to respond to this time?
Yeah, just so thanks for sharing that with me. I think not that, you know, the intention is to build any big houses or anything, and you know, from my understanding, one of your questions was why these houses were certain size. I think it was because of the zoning that 15,500 was all kind of cut it across, and this one is not particularly small or bigger than others. It was the same size as all the other neighbors, and I don't know about your land as well, but you know, just response to some of your points that you said. That there isn't particularly a plan to yet, and we're discussing, of course, as to what kind of house it would be there, potentially in the future.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm also a neighbor.
Nice to meet you.
I'm
Your name,
Patty
please, ma'am?
Myers. My husband would be here, but he just came out of open heart surgery, and so he couldn't make it.
What's your name, ma'am?
Oh, Patty, and the last name's Mars. Myers. We're number 11, so we're kitty corner children.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, starting now, we've got to talk a little bit louder because the
Yes,
concert just
I
got
put
out.
my hearing aids in. We do have some concerns. The farmhouse has been there since we moved in 1978. We've known the families that have lived there. We knew the Deans very, very well. They were very, very good friends.
Okay.
I've been in and out of the house forever, and recent. And to me, it's perfectly habitable. I know there are some structures, and I know some issues, and I know that Ellery was down recently and separated the water from the front to the back.
Yeah.
There were some issues because the back was rented and the front was rented. The Deans owned it for 1978 to I don't know, late 80s maybe they moved, and since then it's been a rental.
Right.
And so there've been, you know, a number of people in and out. But our concern is that, you know, it is an old house. It is the original farmhouse, and we're concerned about what would go up in its place. And as I walk down Cary Avenue and I see the things that have been torn down, and I see what goes up, I'm sorry. That's just, you know, for me to have to walk out my front door and look at that every day versus the farmhouse, it doesn't sit well.
Sure.
You know, I understand, you know, the lot is not all that wide, so the Weeks are right up it, you know, and as are the Muellers, their properties really do bump right into you. So I don't know how big, how wide, how...
Right.
And that was, one of the concerns that some of the neighbors have had, that there has been some turnover from the original owners. And we have a new family right across the street from you. So, but that's basically, we're just concerned about what it is you plan to do, what it is you think you'd like to do.
Sure.
And, I'm a history buff. and I like old houses. And I kind of hate to see it come down.
Well, thank you for
I
that.
think there's essentially two parts to what you said, and that is, you like the house because it's historic. You're worried about what could go up there in its place. And unfortunately, as much as we might care personally about what goes up in we have absolutely nothing to control about. So what we have done, what we do in this hearing, is to focus our attention on the house itself, what's there, whether it has the architectural or historical significance in order to warrant its preservation. And any real issues you have about what's going up there is kind of something that you need to take up with your neighbor.
Which I would like to share if that comes to form, which is not yet.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Frank.
So this commission is in an advisory capacity to the building commissioner, and now that you've submitted a demolition application, the building commissioner is going to be looking for us for one of two things. He's going to want us hear either that you've submitted documentary evidence that this house is in such poor condition that it's not likely that anyone is going to be willing to buy it to preserve it.
Sure.
That's one alternative. Or two, that you have made a bona fide effort to try and sell the house to someone who is willing to purchase it for the purposes of preserving it. Now, which one of those two are you saying that you're submitting to the commission? Which one of those two is?
Well, I'm more leaning towards the first one. I just recently purchased it, and it was didn't make any efforts to try to have somebody else try.
Okay, so you're saying that you have documented evidence that this house is in such poor condition that no one is likely to preserve it. Is that what you're saying? With very limited efforts on my end at this point. Yes. Okay, so we get everyone who comes in that wants to demolish a house. They all have their opinions about it's in such poor condition that no one is likely to buy it. However, we need documented evidence. We need proof from a professional that photographs. You've seen some of the. Well, maybe you weren't here earlier. Some of the documented evidence that people submit, pictures, licensed architects, licensed structural engineers, so that we have something to show the building commissioner that this person made a bona fide effort, and here's the documentary evidence. Without that, we just have your opinion. So
It's a part of Lexington's historic landscape. Even though it is a minor building, we don't have the whole estate. We don't even have any of the land apparently much of the land that went with the estate. So buildings like this are a real placeholder in the neighborhood. So I would really urge you, again, like I said for the earlier people on Revere Street, to look hard at how you can work with the existing building. I know it has several additions on the back of it. Maybe there's a way that you can rework some of those additions and make them more suitable for what you want, or I think a lot of the other things that you've noted here are pretty straightforward. The windows can be repaired, and the steps and the plumbing. And it can really be made much more energy efficient. And there's ways to do that within an old building that are possible. It's not impossible to do that in an old building. So I would encourage you to have an open mind about keeping the house and looking at what you can do to upgrade it, or perhaps shift some of the additions that have already been made. I don't think we're as concerned about the back additions as we are about the main front part of the house. So there'd be more flexibility there, I think, in removing some of those and leaving the old front piece. But I'm just speaking for myself. I mean, that would, the main focus is that front part of the house, not the whole thing.
We might allow the removal of the dormers.
Yeah, I don't know what's with the dormers.
I don't think it ever had dormers.
I find the house to be preferably preserved, and I haven't heard any evidence that it's not feasible to preserve it. And the building code is minimum standard, not maximum standard in terms of the energy efficiency.
You have any comments?
I think original farmhouses should be preserved.
Motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we find the house at 12 Bicentennial Way, preserved, preferably preserved.
And you close the 12 months.
Oh, and well, we do that. It goes without saying.
And, second.
Okay. So you can't tear the house down for a year unless you can come up with structural engineer reports, architectural reports, environmental, that say that the house cannot be preserved because of the issues associated with all of those people's expertise. That is, it cannot be preserved because it is in such poor shape because of the beams are rotting, the foundation is crumbling, the mold has taken over, the termites are eating away. Something like that, something that will give us the ability, the proof that says that this house cannot be preserved. Or alternatively, if you decide that you'd rather not do that, and you'd rather sell the house to someone else, then you need to come back with evidence that says that I tried to sell it on this basis and no one would buy it. And the evidence that you need to come back with are listings, open houses, offers, received or not received, that kind of thing. But something so that some objective evidence that we can apply to your case so that we can tell the building commissioner, lift the demolition delay, let him do what he wants. But without that evidence, you have to wait a year before you can tear the house.
And what happens after a year?
What happens after a year? All restrictions fall away and he can do whatever he likes, subject to the building code, the zoning laws, all of those things.
Good. So that's the limitation of our review.
Just to hold it for a year
It's a demolition delay.
yeah.
To give him the opportunity to explore all of your options.
You can't do it forever.
We'd agree with you at some level, but I think the other thing that it preserves is the opportunity for you to have a conversation about, what would, for you to look at the zoning, figure out what you need, for you to look at, for you to talk with your neighbors if you're willing to, and for your neighbors to get to know you and to weigh in on what might work for them with regard to changing the house. It's intended to be a time when a conversation takes place. It's not intended to be everybody goes to their corner and comes back in a year and bulldozes the house.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Is there a document for me to take away?
No, I will.
Thank you all.
Full turning mills right behind you.
We are now going to have a public hearing on the application of Victor
Chris Gaitis.
Good enough.
And Dylan James, Patriot Custom Homes, with respect to demolishing the building located at 4 Turning Mill Road. Any party, whether entitled to notice thereof or not, may appear in person or be represented by agent or attorney at the hearing.
Good evening. I'm Dylan James here with Mr. Victor and the other co-owner.
And I'm sorry you're going to have to
I'm
speak
sorry,
up because they're
yes.
still having a great time out there.
Sorry about that. 4 Turning Mill Road. This is another tech-built home very similar to the one that you saw earlier this evening. We're here really just proposing to thicken the profile of the roof. As part of the renovations on the interior, we're trying to increase the available insulation in the roof. It's a 2x4 roof frame right now that, as you heard before, is very similar to the other houses, sort of a rotten mess. So we've had to reinforce it without having to thicken it, but it leaves very little room for any insulation. So we'd like to add 4 inches of rigid insulation to the exterior, which will substantially help the house thermal performance. And to give you an idea of pictorially what that does, it's a photograph of the existing house. And Victor has prepared this that really just shows the thickened roof edge. Everything else about the house on the exterior remains as it is.
That's good.
Well, they purchased this house for its appearance, and
Yeah.
the idea is to maintain that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you use the polyiso or the rigid?
Yeah, the polyiso on the outside.
I'm about to get there. I'm just so delighted. Are there any
Can I
comments?
make a
from-
motion?
No, I have to ask for comments from the
Are
public.
there any comments from the public? Are there any comments from the commission?
Ray.
Good. I make a motion?
Yes, please.
Yes, I move that we allow this and congratulate them on their presentation.
Yes.
I worked days on it.
It's the best
Time
one.
well spent.
Before, after, looks good.
So you
Yeah,
moved
thank you.
and seconded and who
All in
seconded?
favor?
All in favor of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, but before we go, we'll sign your
Yep.
Oh, yes.
application.
And it's subject to the evidence which is being recorded along with your mugshots.
And
And,
the drawings that have been
yes.
part of your application.
So I will see you tomorrow.
Likely, yes.
Why is this even?
Well, it's a roof. It's a.
But they're not removing. They're just reframing. They're just
I know.
re-roofing.
I know.
You'd be
Gary.
expected for-
Wanted to make sure.
Gary's very, very careful about roofs. And
Never had too many meetings.
so, I know.
But thank you.
Well, you can't have too much insulation, I suppose, but more.
Yeah, no.
I'm just curious, is it 4 inches plus an 8-inch surface, or 4 inches? including-
4 inches plus a half-inch.
Don't forget flashing, that's on the chimney.
Oh, yeah, I know. But it'll come out the same distance, so it'll look the same.
Thank you. By the way.
Thank you very much.
I think this house, I think the prior owner came in and asked for demolition. And
Yes.
said,
They
"No,
did.
please try to find someone who could
Yeah, this is
preserve
that
it."
one.
And we are thrilled that she found someone, and we're delighted to generate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Lexington.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was back in October, it was a year ago.
Yeah, I found the paperwork and it's all my filing stuff. So I had that
Now
here.
that's out of over here.
Right, coming out.
We are now going to discuss 40 Earl Street.
Yeah, it's
Oh, yeah.
Your name, please, ma'am?
Joanne Kerwin.
You have the floor.
So you encouraged me to come back at any time, and I wanted to come back and ask you, from my hearing, you said that my house was deemed historically significant because it was in the neighborhood. And it was not the house alone, it was the neighborhood that made it significant. And I wanted to know your process in that line of thinking.
Why is the neighborhood significant?
My house was not significant in review of the minutes before and after publication. My house was not significant in of itself. It derived, and it did not even derive its significance. You said it was on an area form, and it was in the neighborhood, and that was what it made it significant. I was careful to review the minutes of the meeting before and after publication, Marilyn, and I just wanted to know what was the process in the thinking.
I can tell you what I was trying to say. If the words did not come out exactly this way, then I'm sorry. What I was trying to say was that the house was a contributing element of a neighborhood that has been recognized in Lexington as an important neighborhood. That is the Meagerville neighborhood. That the house, while it might not, standing alone, have been as significant as it is as a contributing element, it derives, I think I used the word, it derives part of its significance from its location, its contribution to a streetscape. It's part of a neighborhood. But in and of itself, the house is over 100 years old. I can't even remember. 1890? The house is over 100 years old. It maintains most of its historic fabric. It maintains most of its, I believe it's on its original setting. I believe that it still has most of its original materials. It still has the elements that made it important when it was built and important today. And the fact, so while it is not Buckman Tavern, a standalone National Historic Landmark, it is not unimportant because it's not Buckman Tavern. Does that make sense? There are a lot of houses that on a standalone basis in the middle of a field, you would look at and say, why is that historic? And we would say it is historic because of its materials, of its setting, of its design, of its builder, of its association with people. But because it is also in a historic neighborhood, because it significantly contributes to the other members that make that neighborhood significant. Therefore, that's how it derives its significance, and that's why it is important, and that's why we deny the demolition.
Okay, I wanted to hear you say it.
Are there other commission members that can add to this?
Can I point something out, which I think is relevant, even though it has to do with historic districts. There are four historic districts in town, I believe. It used to be 5, now it's 4. Anyway, they're going to put 2 together. But there are houses in the historic districts which don't contribute to the historical fabric. I mean, they're along Mass Ave. You can drive down Mass Ave and you can see houses that have no one, even us, would think were historically significant. But you can't tear down one of those houses because the law that governs historic districts is that you have to come and apply, and get the Historic District Commission to tell you which way they're going to go. In our case, there were areas which were researched that were considered historically significant because they were done as a big development. Meagerville was one example. But there are contributing houses and non-contributing houses in those areas. Yours is a contributing house. And it may not have been named as one of the examples. Sometimes 2 or 3 are picked out as examples. I don't remember whether it was actually whether your address was named.
It actually wasn't surveyed and entered into the Mass Historical Commission database as a surveyed house. So my concern is meeting the criteria of your bylaw.
Not all the houses in an area would have been surveyed. And in fact, some areas, none of them were surveyed individually. But there may have been certain examples picked out. But that doesn't mean that none of the other houses are significant contributors to that area. And yours happens to be one that is.
So I wasn't here for your earlier discussions, and so I'm not familiar with what that content was. But I would say that
I think the content is that after my first meeting, that Marilyn's notes originally did not reflect what was said in the meeting, and the notes were changed before the notes were published. And my concern is that this commission meet the tenets of their own bylaw, which says that a house to be on this cultural resource survey has to be deemed historically significant because of one of the criteria. And at the time of my hearing, there was no knowledge of a house survey, and I was essentially told that my house was historic because it was in the neighborhood. And that is my concern, to understand the process, how a commission can put a house on a survey, not drive by the house, look at the house, or think about the implications of a house and make a ruling on a house without any of that information.
So what I was going to speak to, because I can't speak to what was said or what was in the minutes because I wasn't there, was that there are 5 types of document that we are given to work with. There are area forms. They're developed by the Massachusetts Historical Commission to record different sorts of what are called cultural resources or historic resources. And 5 of them are: there's an area form, there's a building form, there's a form for structures, there's a form for bridges, and there's a form for monuments or graves. So they use when a consultant is hired to perform one of these surveys.
I think Nancy Seashells did the work.
Okay, that's fine. She's an architectural historian and a preservation consultant, but there are other people. But when that happens, the decision is made by that consultant what sort of form is appropriate to document the particular resource. And in this case, the primary documentary effort was to record this partially developed 19th century Meagerville neighborhood, where the character of the neighborhood was in fact scattered development, not 6 little bungalows right next to each other, but a random kind of process, and essentially a failed development. So what she was pulling out is kind of like the raisins in the fruitcake or something, and your house, or the plum in the plum pudding. Your house was one of the plums in that mass of the whole neighborhood, and reflected the intent of the original development. If that wasn't stated clearly in the area form, with respect to your particular house, one of the things we've tried to do is to go back and to document these areas so that they're more clearly, and I think there is a data sheet for Meagerville.
Yeah, it's right here.
So, right, so we went through and pulled out the nuggets that were, that reflected this original intent of the way that Meagerville was to be developed. So your house was one of them, and and there are others. They're simple houses. They're not, as Marilyn I think was trying to say, they're not individual landmarks. They don't stand on their own, meeting every one of those criteria. They contribute. They make a contribution to an understanding of the developmental history of Meagerville, and that's the way in which they're significant. That can mean that they don't have as much significance as some other things. It could mean they have more significance, they're part of a larger, interesting part of Lexington's history. So it's documenting that. We have neighborhoods from the 1920s that have a sort of similar history. They're generally, by the 1920s, they figured out better how to do this. A lot of things changed by then. But so that's really why you weren't singled out, perhaps because you're part of a whole.
But these houses weren't listed arbitrarily. They were listed after the architectural historian who prepared the form went and looked at each house on that list.
To prepare this, it was looked at. They were driven past. They were
on an
looked at.
individual basis. There are other areas in town where houses have been excluded because they were not deemed significant. They were deemed to not contribute to the particular neighborhood. So they were excluded. Your house was included through a process that included it. It wasn't by accident. It was by design by, in this case, Nancy Seychelles, who has a PhD in architectural history.
And I think being a contributing member of a historic district should not make you feel like a second-class citizen. It is being a significant contributing element to that district.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? I'm just resident, Bob Preston. I'm listening to this discussion and I don't know anything about this house and why it contributes to anything. The features of this house.
Well, they're documented on a piece of paper.
They
This is from
actually
the assessors.
weren't, and they weren't entered. And that was the issue, that I could come before this commission, that the house had no information on it, and there was no discussion, and not even a drive-by. And as a Lexingtonian for 21 years, I wanted to understand the process by which this commission works.
I can tell.
And I was uncomfortable with it.
Okay. Well, the process by which the commission works is to
That's
hire a
what I was
consultant,
like
and
to
the
see.
process that the consultant uses is to look at historical maps
She
and to
had a
then
hearing
plot
already.
which ones are
She
the
had a
original
hearing
listed
telling
ones.
about this.
And then they're listed in
She
the,
just
on the
came back
list
to talk.
of the, in the district, in the area data sheet.
Her house isn't, she's not here for a demo permit like the others.
I understand that.
So her, I can tell you what your house
Sir,
is.
what is your question? I'll give you, you had a very detailed question.
I'm sitting here listening. I heard in all the other hearings discussions about features of the house.
Okay.
I didn't hear anything. I heard it said that it was,
Yeah.
evidences the idea for this neighborhood, but
Right.
nothing about what it was about the features of the house that made it evidence.
That's because those other
anything.
houses have individual listings, the individual forms filled out for the specific buildings. This particular house is listed in an area that's defined because a lot of the homes have a certain characteristic that defines it as a cohesive architectural style or period of development. That's
So
why- that's
just
why-
to clarify, we know that I am the only house on Earl Street
Yeah,
that
understood.
is on this list.
Because your house, this is what's called the Queen Anne side hall. It's probably, could have been called a cottage when it was built. But it's a side hall plan, it's in a modest Queen Anne style. And it's one of about 10 houses in the Meagerville neighborhood of a similar style, all built in the first period or the early period of the Meagerville development, which is from 1891 to 98. So, and then there are other houses that are later than that that have different styles, but this one, it just has it's a simple, what we might call vernacular, Queen Anne style house that probably typical of what most people lived in and what Meagerville was supposed to look like, all of. So it has, a gable roof and side hall plan and probably had some additional trim that isn't there anymore, or that may have been covered over in subsequent alterations.
Please,
So,
for the record.
Okay, thank you.
sure.
So we go back to, it's significant because it's in the neighborhood.
No, it's significant because it's an 1890s Queen Anne side hall house. That's why. It's architecturally part of has been there along with a dozen other houses in the neighborhood, not necessarily on your street, but in that subdivision. There's a great, if you want to go, there's a great website called historicmapworks.com. You might want to look at it and see the maps of Meagerville, and you can find your house. And that's, I'm sure, what Nancy Seychelles did when she went to plot out the history of Meagerville. She looked at the maps and said, oh, that house is still there. It's at 40 Earl Street.
Mhm.
So, present at the creation. That's part of it.
Nancy was for many years a member of this commission.
Mhm.
CPC.
Thank you for your time.
We don't really need to talk about the next agenda item because we did 2 nights ago, the CPC stuff. I can tell you that all of the CPC did take a straw vote this afternoon at its meeting, and all of the preservation projects that we supported at our meeting 2 nights ago were passed. The only one that was, excuse me, the only one that that the committee had serious questions about, they continue. Well, there's 2 of them. They continue to question Miriam Hill as to whether it is appropriate to for those houses to be surveyed. And they continue, and there is some question, although I think it's been resolved, about whether listing on the National Register constitutes preservation. I think we have resolved the second issue to Kevin Bott, he's the town council's satisfaction. I would say that possibly both, but certainly in the Miriam Hill situation, there will be questions raised at town meeting. And also, this was only a straw vote, so I don't know for sure that this will be the final vote of the committee, but that's where it stands right now. It was a 4 to 3 to 1 vote.
So, and then the other modification is that those applications now are under our auspices.
But we have not yet figured out what that means. Carl Valente has suggested that that David appear before the Board of Selectmen to present the projects, and it might be appropriate for. So I think it would be. Have you talked to Lynn Peace yet?
No.
Because it's probably too late to get on Monday's agenda.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure I could go on Monday. I don't know yet.
So I think it's probably too late because the agenda was set, would have had to be.
Thursday.
Today's Thursday.
Yeah, that would have been have to be.
Set earlier today.
No.
Yeah.
So it'll probably, I don't know when their next meeting is, but I would, if you wouldn't mind calling Lynn and just getting on for some future date, and then we can figure out who will go.
I'll do that.
I'm a little surprised that town council reviews each one for qualifications. Well, I think that I understood that charge to be CPC's determination.
Well, I think what's happening is that the town council is taking the project description, applying it to the parameters of, excuse me, of the law, the statute, and saying, does it fit? There are no regulations associated with this law, so they just have to read the language of what the definition of rehabilitation is, for example. And so where he finds that a particular project looks more like maintenance than rehabilitation, he advises the town manager that the project is probably not eligible because it is maintenance. And in the past, we have respected that decision and complied with it, because ultimately, if it turns out to fail, it is town council that will have to defend the actions of the commission.
Is this new, or has it always worked this way?
We've always run all of the projects by town council. Unfortunately, the town council, well, he's getting better, but I don't know that he has quite the experience in historic preservation as he does in municipal law. And so part of it is his interpretation. This is the same council that represented us when we were all sued.
Yeah.
Part of it is education on his part, of understanding the structure of the preservation laws and their intent and the way they work together. And, for example, he didn't really understand what the National Register of Historic Places was. So he,
Oh, really?
but unless you were in preservation, you wouldn't.
I'm not in preservation looking, but I know, I've always known about it for some
Well,
reason. 'Cause like,
That's
Anyway.
why you're on the commission.
Okay. The new historic commission packet, have people looked at it?
I have-
So you put a copy in our,
Everybody has a copy. I've gone over this with Gary Rhodes and received input from the other clerks, and everybody in community development is ready to go with it as long as you all agree, and they will start using it tomorrow. Because before, people would have just that purple sheet, and they were thinking they had to get their gas and their phone shut off before they could have a hearing with you. So I've made an instruction sheet, given an application sheet that makes it easier for me to get information from them. Put in the purple demo sheet, made it so the legal notice sheet is there, the abutters is there, and then the questions and how to prepare for a hearing is in there, and then the deadlines for each and every hearing so they'll know. And this is exactly what will be put out, and they will get all of these together stapled.
Do we have all the right, you got all the citations for how it links through to where it currently is in the municipal code online?
Yes, that address right there?
Yeah,
Yeah, Gary and I did that.
but, because I think it's not correct in some of the older things that, I don't know for sure, but you might want to like knock out or just draw a line through
Okay.
some of the citations where it shows up in a different place.
Do you know where?
Well, like in the, is it on the frequently asked questions, I think the last, the full text of the article is available. I don't know if that citation's active anymore.
Okay, I'll check for that. I also took.
That's the only thing I would say.
Alright, I also took out, we had told people, well, there's information in here, and one of them told people to look at the planning board. They don't have anything. I called the Historical Society and spoke with Sally, I think her name is. She has the volumes there, and she also told me I could tell people that they might actually be able to find information out on their house if it's a historical one, because she has house information there.
we do not want to send people to those volumes. Those volumes have been amended, supplemented.
Okay.
So if it still says in here, go to the planning, we want people to use the online version, because
Yeah.
that is the definitive version.
Okay.
That's what
I
I
don't
was.
think they're in the planning office anymore, are
No, I took that
No,
out, and I put
And we don't want them
community
using the
development.
Historical Society's version either, because
Exactly.
those books have not been updated.
Okay.
The library's books have not been updated. The definitive version of the inventory is now the online version.
So take
And
out-
if this says something else,
Yeah, it
it's,
says in addition, copies of the 9-volume inventory are at the reference room.
plus it's 10 volumes, it would be 10 volumes with the latest work, but
Yeah.
So put the online link
Yeah.
in there.
yeah,
Yeah.
just,
just delete that whole sentence, I think.
Yeah.
Or you can just say, in addition, copies of the inventory, and get rid of the 9-volume. And may be examined online at, and then put the site, it's historic survey at .lexington.gov or something.
Okay.
But no one uses the hard copies anymore.
Okay.
is this form a Word document?
Yes.
And it's something they fill out, the applicant fills out?
Well, it's a Word document now, and they fill it out by hand.
Okay, and then we
I'm
get
gonna put it online.
So they get, as a PDF, so.
As a
they can,
PDF?
Yeah.
Okay, because, I don't think we have been keeping track, maybe David's been doing it manually, keeping track of when the hearings are and what the addresses were and what the result of the hearing was.
Oh, yeah, they're all in the minutes.
Okay.
Well, I have a database now that I've gone back a few years. Marilyn brought
That's where I'm
me.
getting it.
Yes, I have a
We haven't,
database with everything, and this helps me to, these questions on here help me
Yeah.
to build that.
And I think Teresa said she's made a file of every property we've ever reviewed. So
I have a
if one-
I have a
Okay.
file pretty much of every property on the list.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So then you can just plug in information if something
Yep.
comes.
If somebody comes,
That's great.
I go like, I open up my they brought me my file cabinets, I have like an actual file, and now I'm putting those files into the information into the database on
Wow.
the computer.
Yeah.
So David has been our corporate memory, and now
Well,
what you're doing is
you know, the minutes,
actually-
the way I used to take them, had who was here, what the issue was,
Yep.
and what the decision was, which is the legal requirement. It turns out, luckily, it's the legal requirement. I mean, we did have there would be some discussion
Yeah.
that was recorded on occasion, but mine were minimal. And I found out that other boards, like the appeals, I think the Board of Appeals, that's all they do.
Yeah.
And, and the health, the health committee board, whatever, Board of Health, that's all they do.
Yeah.
There's no discussion recorded.
Well, we heard in our commission training thing that in fact you had to have discussion now.
I have to have some discussion,
Oh,
it has
okay.
been told
Now,
not
the
to
new
get
one.
into explicit details, but to give the basics of pretty much what
Yeah.
happened. Like
And
not a
of
word
course,
for
it's all
word.
recorded.
Yeah, that's
So-
why they ease it up on
The
what's
legal
required.
record is on FTV.
I guess maybe if the commissioners could look at the frequently asked questions, number 6. In terms of, I want to put on an addition, does demolition delay prevent this or require me to get permission? And frequently, an addition covers up an elevation, so qualifies under demolition. So
These,
that,
I'll say, these
so
are
that-
existing, so I
but
don't know.
so I think that needs to be revised to refer to a particular statute to see whether or not it qualifies as demolition.
The other thing that's not in here is the time limit information.
Yeah.
And we did include something that's like a demolition by neglect. It's not demolition by neglect.
Well, we have demolition by neglect bylaw.
Yeah,
Full
so I think we probably,
bylaw.
Right, I didn't compile these were
No,
off
I
the
know.
website,
No,
so I
that's
don't know.
right.
These were
Like-
compiled when we went to town meeting.
That's right, yeah.
To get the demolition by neglect and to get the definition
Yeah.
of substantial demolition. So maybe we need to relook at at least the frequently asked questions.
Yeah, the answer to 6 is maybe.
But you know, demolition by
Exactly.
neglect is really a very different
Exactly.
issue.
And it is up to the building.
It's a very different issue than
He might
this.
get like the roof. He knew that.
People don't
when he
come in and
gets-
apply
for, no,
for
no, it's an
demolition by
action.
neglect, so I don't
I think we need that.
I don't
right.
think it's needed in this
But the
package.
time limit is.
It's needed somewhere, but not in here, I
Yeah.
don't.
I think it would be good to have to have the town.
Yeah, that was what I thought.
So what, we need to fix number 6 and,
Well, I think once we adopt the new time limit legislation, I mean, that, or not
no, we've got to
legislation,
fix this,
policy.
because number 7 doesn't work either.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Hmm?
I didn't mean to interrupt you, number 7 doesn't work either. So I think before the
Yeah.
Q&A get distributed.
Oh, yeah, no, that should come.
So I'll take out
Yeah, number 7 should be.
these component, the,
The FAQs.
yeah, I'll take out the owner's guide, the property owner's guide, what an owner can do, and the demo delay questions.
Yeah, you
And-
can do the rest of it, and then we'll
Okay.
correct and update the
It's great that you did this
public.
because it brought it to us for attention.
Well,
That
what
some
I
of these
was-
things need to be revised.
Getting a lot of in there is when somebody came in for historical commission, they were simply handed that purple paper, and they didn't understand it, and I was
Right.
looking at it, I'm like, this doesn't,
Yeah.
well, how would this
Yeah.
trigger a hearing? So that's why now they have their little information, and now they have the historical commission application, and that seems to make people happier.
1 minute.
No, I think you're right, Ann. I mean, they should have all of this.
And every other committee that, or commission that the clerks are in my office.
Teresa, I thought you would wanna have that for the 9 Revere Street, that's the stuff that I looked up today.
Okay, yeah, I'll put it in the 9 review.
Could we, so what we'll do is maybe at the next meeting, we'll come back with marked up copies of that.
Okay.
Quickly before Wendell bolts, because he's making his I'm about to bolt movements. Let's leave the open meeting law for another time. Could we talk about that new time limits policy? Because we had our public hearing in September, October. We've considered the comments, we've talked to town council, we've talked to the building department. Are we ready to adopt this policy?
I am. I think it's,
Yes?
Yeah, I am too. Enforcement is the key, is the issue, but I mean, it's,
Yes.
I don't want to belabor it either, but, yeah.
Okay, so could I entertain a motion to adopt the time limits policy? And I think it was dated.
Are you asking for a motion, or are you?
I'm
Just
asking for
looking for the
I'm looking
date.
for the date of the policy so that we can properly identify it.
Yeah, I don't know.
The draft dated 6/18/12, I think is the last one. It says, yes, it's the draft of 6/18/12.
okay.
Marilyn?
So moved.
Oh,
Oh,
gonna
did you
say,
want to move?
I'd like to make a motion
Oh,
Okay.
Frank, make a motion.
that we adopt the time limit policy that we've had reviewed by town meeting regarding our decisions, and outlined in last draft, June 18th of 2012. And we adopt that as a working policy from now.
Reviewed by town council or town meeting?
It was
Town
approved by
council.
town council, sorry. And-
After
and
public
after
hearing.
public hearing.
On
Yes, thank you.
October 11th,
October 11th, okay. Yeah, that's when, yeah.
the public hearing was.
Yeah.
Wow.
Seconded.
You got that?
All those in favor?
Yeah. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Night.
Can I actually, I want to add one thing on the
I got a
agenda
problem, and I don't know what it is.
that, David, I had the idea after our meeting the other night on Tuesday that perhaps it would be a good idea to let institutional owners, organizational owners of historic property in Lexington know that they indeed can apply for CPA money, and that it's not just the town that gets to use it, or it's not, the town isn't the only applicant that's eligible. So I had wondered if maybe I developed a list over Christmas vacation, and maybe at the January meeting come back and we can have a letter that goes out from the Historical Commission saying, you know, we think you should be aware of these sources of funding, and PPF, if it's on the register, and CPA, and that
Yeah, I mean,
preservation is important to us, and we
Is
can
that
help
going
you.
to sit with the CPC? I mean, they didn't like it, Mary
They don't
Hill.
like it. They don't like private applications, except the Historical Society. But there is absolutely nothing in the statute
Yeah.
that prohibits.
No, I understand that.
And so I think,
But the question is, if we send a letter out to a list of, you said institutional,
yeah. owners.
commercial or institutional?
churches and
Institutional.
things.
Well, schools and churches.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then that's I think, very worthy recipients of CPA funding.
Yeah, people who,
Absolutely.
who have a public purpose in what they do.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that I think
Provide
it would be
public
good politically to have CPC on board with doing this rather than, you know, I don't want to
Well,
do
I
it without.
know it would be potentially disruptive, but I just feel it's part of our mission to
Absolutely.
advocate for preservation.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
based on what some of the money's been spent on so far.
That's fine.
Yeah. I'm very much in favor.
I think we.
I'm in favor of it, I'm just.
Yeah, I know
I'm
it
just
could have
saying it, you
political
know, that-
consequences. And I don't know how, I mean, I think if it were to make Marilyn's job any harder,
Well, it's, yeah.
maybe.
No.
You can think about it, we can think about
The
it.
thing
And-
is, it doesn't hurt to add, it doesn't hurt to apply. They can be shut down and they can, but I suppose the more people that apply, maybe sooner or later the message will get through that they're eligible.
That was really my thinking.
Yeah, it's the
On a-
best game.
I have
On
my
another
Yeah,
note,
all right, no,
when we were discussing the news assessment
And do I get to
today,
keep all this?
all of
I
that's your
suggested that we add a
copies.
Thank you very
sentence,
much.
You will be
encouraging,
getting one mailed a month.
the use
I-
of
I didn't go
historic
home
homes
on my
for
way
affordable
here
housing.
and
That's
I
okay.
didn't pick up the
And I
package,
made a motion
but
to
I had looked
include
at it,
that,
so I knew what
and it was
the
not seconded.
places were.
Yeah, in that application,
Okay.
they're
Silence in
required
the
to bring
room
it to
was
me
deafening.
10 days before the hearing.
I appreciate your.
That way I can get
Yeah,
it
no,
to
that's
all.
fine.
On every
just
single.
The biggest folder I've gotten.
I've been a little out of it the last
I
couple
heard.
weeks. And,
You need company.
I still don't know what's going on.
Somebody
So-
gonna adjourn the meeting or?
Oh,
Meeting to motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn. In favor?
Second, all in
Yes.
favor, aye.